How's everybody doing this morning? All right. Sorry I ran last time, about 7 minutes. We're going to make this very quick. And I've recovered from the fact you didn't know who Socrates was. Sorry, I don't know who asked that, but it's okay. We're going to start with this. Who is Socrates? Well, if you remember, we left the world in a bit of turmoil around 400, 500 BC. We left him right after Heraclitus and Parmenides had two things, and I want to make a correction on yesterday. I said being and non-being. I meant being and becoming. Those are the two things of philosophy. But they couldn't agree. Was everything the same? It is what it is. Or is everything changing? You can't step in the same place in the river twice. And these were the arguments. But this is fine. These are things we should discuss. These were smart guys. The problem was, because they couldn't agree, which again was okay, because we're not going to understand everything, but we need to work it out. Society, the Greek culture as a whole, basically said these guys are the two smartest guys in the world, and they can't figure it out, so this only leaves us with two conclusions, as we said last time. Either there is no truth, has no truth, or there's no way we can know it, so why bother? And like I said, I joked about the world ending in barbarianism, and it didn't, because of Socrates. Socrates came along and was afraid, wait a minute, if we're no longer asking what is true, I mean, we all have to live our lives and survive and everything else, but if there's no longer ever a tolerance, ever a hunger, a desire to know, hey, is this true? Are we thinking right? Do we got this thing figured out right? Is this how the world works? There's no desire to think that, then there's no truth. And if we get to the point that we literally say, not only do I not know the truth, there isn't any truth to be known. There's no truth. You think, I think, it's the only thing that really ends up mattering is what works. You heard that? What works? You've heard of someone being practical. That's a good thing. You only have $100 for the week. You say, okay, I need this much for gas, and I need this much for groceries, and I'm going to save this $20 as an emergency buffer. We would say they're being practical, right? And then a budgetary sense. Practical is one thing. Pragmatism is another thing totally different. Pragmatism says it becomes a lifestyle. Anything with an ism is how you view everything, how you filter every thought, every problem. So if there's no longer any truth, or you don't care that there's truth, or even if there was, you couldn't know it, and that's out of the question, you still have to get up every morning, you still have to eat, you still meet with people, and it begins what works, what makes you successful, what makes you happy, what makes you move up in positions, what gets you money, what makes you fulfill your desires. And you had a lot of things that came out of that time, or things that were existence in Greek but became more prominent. You had the sophists, who were only known for wisdom from the Greek god Sophia, but it became more of a industry then. They would sell the wisdom. And what they were selling was more of a rhetoric. And they used their brains and their communication skills not to figure out things or to express their views or to argue with someone else's views, but simply to sell. They became a bunch of salesmen, rhetorists. Now, if you're a salesman or a saleswoman, don't think it's wrong. This goes back to the whole thing of being practical and pragmatism. It's okay to sell, but their sales thing was their life. Like, the only thing that mattered was that they were successful and that they sold. In other words, if they were trying to sell them life insurance, they weren't worried about the moral implications, whether they lied to them. Lying didn't really matter, because there was no truth, there was no morals, there was no standard. The only thing that matters is if you sold that, if you did what your job was and you did it well. Wow. I don't know, does that sound familiar to you? Does that, if you've ever worked in a company or just in your office or just motivational things or things on TV, is that what you end up with? You ever heard the expression, at the end of the day, which can be a very practical expression if you get caught up in the details and you can't remember what your original focus is, or it could mean the means justify the ends. It doesn't really matter what we do as long as we accomplish our goal. Well, you know, pragmatism works well. The Roman Empire came in, took over the Greeks, and were very strong for a long time based off of pragmatistic philosophy. You were thought to be stealing. There's usually not a trial, depending on your status. They had laws and courts and things like that, but you know, if you were convicted, boom, if you were convicted of murder, you killed. They didn't get caught in 80 years in prison and a big appeal system. Roman soldier need to take care of something. He killed you and then told the other guy to bury your body, and you would do that, or he would get killed, and no money was spent. You didn't have to raise taxes because, you know, we didn't have to fund the prisons or the Congress or the lawyers. There wasn't that many lawsuits. I mean, they had these things in place, but it wasn't like we have today. They were very strong financially and very strong militarily because the value of the strength of their government was more valuable than the value of the person. They weren't bothered by petty little things like human life being given value by God and that we don't have a right to take it just because we want to. There are certain laws that apply, such as war or retribution for heinous crimes or murder or so forth like that. So you have a bunch of people now that don't care what truth is. They don't even believe it's truth. And if you bring up the word, you just get laughed at. And this bothered Socrates. This bothered him a lot. This bothered him to the point that he continued on this campaign he had to his death because he was stirring up. Plato, his student, considered him the gadfly, which is, I guess, a reference to a fly that would stir up a horse because he referred to Athens as a dim-witted horse. Just plodding along in life with no concern to what is truth, only to what is successful, only to what works. It's not what's right or what you should do or what is. Is there a God? Are we accountable to him? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you got my point? All right. So he comes along and his whole dialogue was to ask questions, to challenge the young men to think, why? Why? Like a 5-year-old. Why do you do this? Well, because, why do you do that? Why? Do you ever question? No. Why don't you? He wanted them to think. He wanted to stir that brain up. He wanted to say, look, you're alive, you're breathing. Ask Rene Descartes questions. I was like, I think therefore I am. Where did you come from? What's going on? It's very disruptive to society. I tell you what, truth or the pursuit of truth, knowing what's right and being willing to try to boil it down and find out what it is not good for business. It's not good. Morals, they're not good for business. What you want is a group of people that are willing to sell, that are willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish the goal of the business to be successful. You don't need to be bothered by morality and truth and all that kind of crap. You don't need that. No, that's bad for business. That just stirs up everything. Look, we got a good thing going here. We're masters of the rhetoric. We can talk the hind ear off a horse. That's hilarious. We can talk the hind leg off a horse. This is crazy. Well, Socrates continued to question, continued to bring the upheaval. His concern was, like I mentioned before, that without truth, there would be no morality. And without morality, there would be anarchy and barbarianism. And might is right. That would be it. You could kill the guy, fine, you're right, because there's no right and wrong. It's not like, you shouldn't kill the women and children. Who cares? They're in the way. There's no right or wrong. Sounds so familiar to our society. He didn't write anything down. Socrates didn't write anything down at all. We only have what we have from his students. Plato and Aristotle later on, and other students that aren't as popular. That's all we have. He was busy talking. When he taught, he walked around and he would ask questions. He would ask questions, and then in the questions might be the answer. He would stir young men to thought and that was his focus, was young men, to get them to think, to get them to question, to use their energy and their brains on what is truth and what is right, not just what makes them successful, funding their business and so forth. Wait a minute. Socrates died in 399 BC. In case you're wondering, the numbers for BC, of course, get smaller as you go later as opposed to AD. So we're further along than the other two guys we talked about. But in about 400 years, in the Roman Empire, which took over the Greeks, it would be another little country under the Roman control. Little country founded for a guy who was originally named Jacob and later called Israel. Be a little boy, not really good standing, born in a manger. 33 years later, or 30 years later, he would be walking around, not writing anything down, asking people questions, asking them what they did with the law and the prophets, asking them about their religious activities, asking them who they thought God was, telling them who God was, what was important, what wasn't important, stirring up trouble, and just like Socrates, condemned by the courts to death. I'll let you think on that one. We'll pick that one up later. All right, guys, have a great day.